I'm wondering if we should begin. I think we're okay. I think we're all here. It's a full house. And I'm very, very delighted to see all of you. Hello and good evening. A very warm welcome to the world premiere of From Subordination to Revolution. My name is Sumi, Madhok, and I'm Professor of Political Theory and Gender Studies at the Department of Gender Studies at the London School of Economics, and also the head of department. I'm delighted to be here as chair and discussant, and alongside all of you, to celebrate the launch of Professor John Chalcraft's new book, From Subordination to Revolution, a Gramscian Theory of Popular Mobilization. We have a wonderful panel here to kick off the discussion on the book. I'll get down to the business of introducing them. And I will do that. I will introduce them in the order in which they will speak. But before that, let me acknowledge the empty chair, which symbolizes the absence of Palestinian and other oppressed students and educators who can't be here with us today. So our first speaker then is Professor John Chalcraft, and he will briefly introduce the book. As you all know, and Professor John Chalcraft needs no introduction here, he's the Professor of Middle East History and Politics at the Department of Government at the LSE. His main research interests are in documenting and theorizing history and politics from below. His many publications include the book that we're about to launch, of course, and in addition, he's also more recently the author of Popular Politics in the Making of the Modern Middle East, published by Cambridge University Press in 2016, and a host of important articles and other interventions. John's opening remarks to the book will be followed by responses to the book by the panel assembled here. First, it will be followed by Paul Apostolidis, who's on my left. He's professor and school academic lead for student civic engagement at the Department of Government at the LSE. Paul's research interests include critical theory and integrating empirical inquiry into methods of political theory. His most recent publication is The Fight for Time, Migrant, Day Labourers and the Politics of Precarity, published in 2019 by Oxford University Press. To my right is Professor Laurence Coax, and after Paul finishes his intervention, it will be Laurence's turn. Laurence Coax is Professor of Sociology at Maynooth University. As an engaged social movements researcher, Laurence's research is in long-standing dialogue with movement practitioners about how to understand social movement development. He's also the co-founder of the Practitioner Journal Interface. His recent publications include We Make Our Own History, Marxism and Social Movements in the Twilight of Neoliberalism. And finally, it'll be my turn to speak. My name is Sumi Madhok, as I already said to you right at the beginning. My research interests mainly lie in feminist political theory and also in rights politics in most of the world. And I've published a book in 2021, and it's called Vernacular Rights Cultures, the Politics of Origins, Human Rights and Gendered Struggles for Justice. So the order for this evening events is as follows. Each speaker will speak for about 12-ish, 12.5 minutes, but John gets to speak for 14 and 14.5 minutes. and then, of course, it will be your chance to ask questions in Q&A. So after the panel finishes, it's your turn, and there will be enough time for that. A few points of housekeeping. This event will be recorded and will be shared on social media, and thanks to the government department at the LSE for hosting, and Kay O'Neill for significant professional services that an event like this involves, and also to James Robbins for online content. I've been told that you can follow the Department of Government for all the latest updates on Instagram, at LSE Government, on X, they're still on Twitter, well, on X at LSE Government, on Blue Sky, also at LSE Government, and on LinkedIn. And afterwards, there is an afterwards, because a book like this always generates such wonderful and terrific and long, flowing conversations. So there is an afterwards, and you're welcome to join us for a drink at a George IV pub where we carry on the discussion. So, let me now begin the conversation. So, John, go for it.
All right, so can you hear me, everybody? Well, wonderful to see you. Look, thanks so much to everyone for coming, to Sumi for chairing, to Sumi, Paul and Laurence for acting as discussants, and yeah, reiterate the thanks to Kay O'Neill for all the amazing work in putting the event together, and James Robbins as well for the online content, and to the Government Department for hosting. And, special mention to my Aunt Frances, who has arrived. We've come a long way to see me, so thank you very much. And to the other members of the family. Unusual to see the family here at LSE, but really good. Welcome. And I'm obviously looking forward to all the critical engagement and discussion. So, as you might have gathered, this is a theory of popular mobilization. It's based on the intellectual tradition begun by the Italian revolutionary communist intellectual Antonio Gramsci. And it's based on case studies taken from all over the world over the last couple of hundred years. The book defines popular mobilization, eventually, and after plenty of trial and error, mostly error, as the many ways in which subordinated groups rearrange their relationships to challenge and overcome social domination. The book aims to speak to the theoretical and practical predicaments of the present. On the one hand, we have the terrible issue of left weakness and division, even after all the inspiring mass uprisings and mobilizations of the 2010 decade. Now we even face a situation, even amid the discontent generated by neoliberal failure, of right-wing ascendancy. So we have this sort of problem, but in the theoretical side we have a problem. We have highly divergent and separated tendencies in critical theory. And these two predicaments perhaps are linked. In this fraught context, the aim of the book is to offer a genuinely connecting theory, one that can grasp within a single approach the great diversity of popular mobilization. The hope is that can contribute to bringing together progressive struggles in practice. So I'm not going to take you through the whole theory. That's going to be too abstract. Instead, I'm going to sort of invite you in to the festival of thinking and engagement so that we can think together. And I'm going to do that by sort of giving you a sense of what the fundamental puzzle is and the problem that the book aims to address, and then just get you to the point where you sort of understand the basic vocabulary and conceptual approach that the book takes. So that'll drive you wild with curiosity, obviously. And at the end of all that, you won't be able to do anything but bring yourself to read the book. So what's the puzzle then? Well, I came to this topic through decades of research on history and politics from below in the Middle East and North Africa and Southwest Asia. I've written about crafts and service workers in Egypt, migrant workers in Lebanon and the Gulf, transnational Palestine organizing, including in Britain, and I wrote a wide-ranging history of popular politics in the Middle East. All that, of course, meant wrestling with this question, like what's the topic? Protest, resistance, mobilization. What does it mean? What are we looking for? When we speak about efforts to bring about social change, how can we describe them and theorize them? And that turns out to be quite a profound theoretical puzzle. And it's one obviously intimately connected to practical predicaments. For critical theorists, one of the great provocations is Marx's famous Thesis 11 from the Theses on Feuerbach, written in 1844. He wrote there, philosophers have only interpreted the world, the point is to change it. Marx and Marxism ended up arguing that the real and only way to change the world was to remake the material basis of society, to engage in a class struggle against capitalism, to transform the mode of production, to bring about communism in which humanity would freely transform nature and thus find emancipation and self-realization. In this optic, popular mobilization engages fundamentally with class struggle and, if you will, questions of distribution. Other great thinkers and activists, however, figures such as W.E. Du Bois, Simone de Beauvoir, Frantz Fanon, Ali Shariati, Stuart Hall, Edward Said, these have raised questions about identity, about gender, knowledge, sexuality, race, and culture, including cultures of imperialism and colonialism. Here, power and transformation are not just matters of material relations. They must surely involve the remaking of meaning, of culture, and identity. To change the world, and ultimately, to pick a left Hegelian like Alex Honneth, and it means a struggle for recognition. Others, however, particularly in the anarchist tradition, they raise the question of the state. It's not enough to discuss simply the economy or the culture. What about the state? Should it not be done away with? As Noam Chomsky said once, in a discussion not far from here about the one-state, two-state solution of Palestine, he said, well, what about the no-state solution? This is the voice of anarchism. And they accuse Marxist-Leninists of being guilty of authoritarianism in seeking to bring about socialism through state coercion. So the question for the stumbling student of resistance, that's me, over the last 30 years or so, is do you have to choose then between distribution, recognition, or between anarchism and Leninism? Didn't these theoretical divisions translate also into fundamental practical divisions on the left? And hasn't that been disabling? Has it in fact not left some of the ruling classes chuckling into their cornflakes? So is there any way to link some of this diversity together and thereby reunite different kinds of progressive? In many ways, of course, that's what intersectionality has tried to do. And that accounts for its appeal, its interest, its dynamism. But for all its vital lessons, intersectionality has very little to say about the state. It's much stronger on domination than on resistance. And there is real doubt about whether it has a stable theoretical core. It certainly raises many questions as to how different struggles fit together. So, what about a Gramscian alternative? What about what the book calls the living Gramscian tradition? Isn't that an exciting possibility? For me, Gramsci had been a reference for sort of 20 years or so, but it was only about 10 years ago that I was able to begin a kind of intensive textual study. And that's when I started to feel the excitement of the various theoretical breakthroughs and possibilities that Gramsci offers. And that was sort of, inspiring for me as a sort of oldish kind of dog who never really thought that some of these theoretical dilemmas could be resolved. But Gramsci's sort of promising. Like, think of the predicaments we just mentioned, and then think of the sort of career of Gramsci over the years. He was accused by Leninists of being an anarchist. He was accused by anarchists of being a Leninist. He was accused by Marxists, from Trotsky to Tronti to Althusser, of being an idealist, i.e. too obsessed with culture and identity. He was accused by idealists, most recently Laclau and Mouffe, of being in fact economistic and in hoc to a Marxist meta-narrative. He's also, at the same moment, been embraced by Marxists and Leninists, even a very thoroughgoing kind, Joseph Femia, Peter Thomas. He's also been embraced on the other side by genuine idealists like a Norberto Bobbio. He's also, if that wasn't enough, been used by Third World anti-colonial revolutionaries for decades, but he's also been accused of being part and parcel of a Western colonizing epistemology. So, either Gramsci, who gave his life for revolutionary communism and died because of a fascist prison, either he was incoherent and full of contradictions, as Perry Anderson famously argued in 1976, although he didn't use the word contradictions, he used the word antinomies, because contradictions is good if you're a Marxist. So either he's incoherent, or perhaps this wily Sardinian, as he is known, was onto something rather original. A synthesis, perhaps, in the swan song of revolutionary Europe, of questions material, cultural, and political. And that's the sort of excitement and promise. And the book takes the view that there's a deep originality in the living Gramscian tradition. And the key entranceway into that, which I'm not going to go into in much detail, is the philosophy of praxis, the politics of hegemony, and the history of subaltern social groups, these huge contributions that Gramsci makes. What I just wanted to say in the last 4 minutes is what's sort of crucial in relation to this optic for theorizing popular mobilization. So instead of thinking primarily in terms of material relations, culture, or the state, what I think it is fundamentally is that Gramsci's optics enable us to put sort of front and center, and this is, language which I think is in some ways quite colloquial, to put front and center the kind of human predicaments, paradoxes, and struggles that emerge in a thoroughly historicized context of domination and hegemony. If I just let me unpack that in 4 key points before concluding. The first is a point about identity. These human predicaments, paradoxes, and struggles in a Gramscian optic certainly do involve the question of what Gramsci called historical personality, the dialectics of social being and social consciousness. Who am I and what do I wish to become? That wrestling with questions of identity, the question of self-changing self-realization, is very important in Gramsci and very much situated on a changing terrain. Subalternity, meaning marginalization and domination, class and group consciousness, the question of the social bloc, the question of the historical bloc. The question here is not to be or not to be. The question is how to become. And it's not a sterile debate about the priority of social being versus the priority of social consciousness. It's a question of their dialectical interrelation. So that's the first point about identity. The second point is about structure. The struggles and predicaments that I mentioned most certainly have a structural face. They involve the transformation of nature in the economy, i.e. they involve productive systems on the one side. They also involve the transformation of each other in language, culture, civil society, and the state. So structural issues are fundamentally in play. But the question is not whether the economy determines civil society or whether civil society determines the economy and all these questions of materialism and idealism. The question is, 1, how can these structures be connected? And 2, how can they be radically transformed? The third point concerns force. So modes of often tortured existence operate on a far from innocent terrain. They instead on a highly political terrain of hegemony, which involves a balance and relation of forces, combinations of leadership and domination. The theory of hegemony draws our attention, not to the way the ruling class is always able to win consent, and not simply to the kind of nefarious forms of domination that we find within those structures of power. But it draws our attention more interestingly, more strategically, to a terrain to be transformed, to the formidable challenges that face revolutionaries. The point is that persuasion is not enough. Boggs's consensual revolution is not enough. Revolutionaries will have to construct a social force if they are to be successful. That's the third point about force. The fourth and final point here is about space and time. So these ways of becoming, along with their structures and forces, they're deeply historicized. They have a past, a present, and a future, and they're connected in time and space. Or they suffer from degrees of temporal and spatial fragmentation. So I want to say that in these 4 points about identity, structure, force, and spatio-temporality, we can see how a Gramscian approach puts front and center the human predicaments, his paradoxes and struggles that emerge in a thoroughly and deeply historicized context of domination and hegemony. This is a very long way of getting to my popular mobilization. So, because it means that instead of thinking of culture, class relations, or the state, the search for transformation can address very squarely the many ways in which subordinated groups wrestle with, challenge, and overcome domination, situated as it always is in wider forms of hegemony. So the primary point of entry is not a materialism or an idealism or an anarchism versus a Leninism, it's domination itself, and above all the question of how it can be overcome. So the idea of all this is a preamble, as I say, to whet your appetite. You'll have to read the detailed elaboration of the theory, because, you know, you obviously haven't had that here. But what I hope you'll see is, well, the word popular here, it draws attention to the plural ensemble of the subordinate. The word mobilization draws attention to all the in-depth molecular work of changing relationships that's necessary. And the various faces of popular mobilization that I speak about in the book, these are the faces of identity, structure, and force that I've mentioned. And the various phases of popular mobilization that I've mentioned relate to the way these processes have to be historicized in time and space. And here's a tough sentence. The depth of subaltern unification interprets the phase changes and the rhythms of renewal and decomposition. And just very briefly then, the book is really quite constructed around these the four sort of major phases in the long journey from subordination to revolution. And the first has to do with the torturous contradictions of domination. The second has to do with the well springs of autonomy. The third has to do with the expansive search for consent. And the fourth has to do with the roiling ferment of revolution. And finally, the overall argument is that when these faces and phases are connected organically, then we can envision, both in theory and practice, the long journey from subordination to revolution. So I said I just wanted to sort of invite you in. I'm concluding now, and to get you to sort of think, gosh, I really probably have to read the book now, because he really didn't summarize it, but he did sort of give some of the thinking behind it, to say what that puzzle is and how the attempt to think popular mobilization in a different way and to detail what it means in conceptual depth. The main point, of course, is to speak actually to the theoretical and practical predicaments of the present, to build a connecting theory, solving some fundamental theoretical problems, and helping to fertilize, I hope, the articulation of struggles to bolster a left amid profound crisis. Gramsci aimed at socialist renewal in the 20th century, and this book hopes to join hands with the very great many people of all kinds, theorists, but those activists and others, who are thinking in terms of renewal, and especially of transnational democratic socialism in the 21st. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, John. And now to Paul.
Okay, thanks. Before I start, just wanted to say thanks to everybody for coming, thanks to Kay and all who helped to make this event possible, but especially thanks to John for giving us this tremendous book. I loved what you said about all the people that Gramsci alienated. And my inclination is to say, if he managed to piss off that many people, he was definitely doing something right. No, but honestly, there are so many features of this book that I deeply admire and appreciate that it is really hard to know where to start. But I'll name a few of those characteristics that stand out in particular for me, and I'll also pose three critical questions for John. So first and foremost, on the laudatory side, I think the book offers a richly conceptualized, fully elaborated theory of popular mobilization, broken down into the four key phases that John described towards the end of his comments. I really see this schematization of phases as the book's central accomplishment. I think that John illuminates and clarifies how popular mobilization, to achieve far-reaching change, is a developmental process that takes time, forethought, organization, endurance, and an unbelievable amount of hard work. Grasping this schema makes it easier then to spot how such mobilization is often mistakenly identified with just one of the hallmark activities of these phases, rather than understood as necessitating gradual, purposeful transitions among them. So John thus elucidates how Gramsci himself theorized these complex and indeterminate processes, which puts into critical perspective reductivist interpretations of Gramsci, whether from, say, a cultural studies perspective that fixates on fleeting manifestations of rebellion in popular culture, or from a view that fails to recognize all of the preparatory effort that has to precede any reasonably promising attempt to challenge state authority directly. And this precise mapping of mobilization phases also comprises an invaluable theoretical and practical resource for people and groups who yearn today for a new approach to fomenting change on a grand scale and feel very much on the back foot in this era of rising neo-fascism. Another signature contribution of the book is to name, demonstrate, and celebrate what John calls a living Gramscian tradition. In my own research, I've relied on Gramsci to help me analyze migrant workers' politics and everyday lives in the United States. And I've been vaguely aware of Gramsci's uptake in many diverse world contexts during the 20th and 21st centuries. But to my knowledge, John is the first person to provide so extensive an account of how Gramsci's ideas have directly influenced popular political endeavors in so many parts of the world, from Latin America to the Middle East, South Asia, and elsewhere. At the same time, John also shows persuasively how even when political actors are not directly citing Gramsci, Gramscian concepts and categories have the power to yield insights into the dynamics of historical and contemporary mobilizations across the globe. That then takes me to my first critical point. So this is not a thin book. It's a lengthy, in-depth account of Gramscian theory and its relevance to recent and contemporary popular politics. And it aspires very ambitiously to be comprehensive in doing this. Even so, at certain points, I found myself wanting more elaboration of examples, I know it sounds crazy, but examples that John proposes to illustrate a certain dynamic of leadership or an approach to the formation of a party or a bloc. I really value the passages where the book lingers with an example and explains events and their confluences with Gramscian ideas, especially for readers who may lack familiarity with the world region at issue. But I wanted more meat on the bones at moments like one where, say, John proposes that the post-revolutionary Mexican state, post-2005 Bolivia, Senegal in the 1960s and 70s, and Welsh devolution all can be interpreted as manifesting passive revolution in Gramsci's sense, in a way that is highly suggestive, but to my mind could use some fleshing out. So I wonder, John, as a strategy for splicing theory together with history, did you consider the advantages of going more in depth with a more selective set of examples, drawn strategically from a diverse but perhaps less numerous array of contexts, to still demonstrate the fecundity of the living Gramscian tradition? But thinking about the geographical scope of John's project also brings me to another triumph of the book. By juxtaposing Gramscian theory with world political events, John provides a new conception of how the quest for an alternative hegemony, grounded in democratic popular power, can and must transcend national borders today. And one of the brilliant aspects of the book is that John does this in a way that takes full stock of Gramsci's explicit association many times of popular mobilization with the creation of a national popular collective will, and with the new state spirit, in Gramsci's terms, that is national. And yet John also draws salutary attention to underappreciated moments in Gramsci's texts that really do point in more internationalist, transborder directions. In particular, I love the way John provokes thinking about how the labors of translation that are so crucial to the activities of organic intellectuals who ensure vibrant connections between leaders and mass participants, how such translation can be construed in terms of generating cross-border linkages among popular forces. John writes, quote, "Searching for new forms of transnational popular consciousness," end quote, has become imperative in this time of reascendant right-wing nationalism. And I think that that articulates the challenge eloquently. And it's also a challenge that appears very possible to meet if we follow John, drawing on Gramsci, in understanding fascist politics as a mode of passive revolution. So John writes that for Gramsci, quote, "passive revolution is identified negatively with elite engineering and reorganization that tames popular mobilization and prevents genuine revolution." That angle on fascism stirs hope in me because it suggests that even though right-wing populist elites, like Farage and Trump, claim to speak for and in the voice of the people, Their connections to the people's own ideas and experiences might be, in a basic sense, neither real nor durable. Yet that also brings me to a second critical question for you, John, which is to wonder whether even this modest dash of hopefulness that I feel might be just misplaced. That would be the case, right, if the right-wing projects that are in ascension today actually rest precisely on the painstakingly careful, long-term cultivation of consent and bloc formation among various popular social groups which the Gramscian approach endorses. So now my third and final critical response concerns the one aspect of the book with which I find myself in disagreement. That's the argument for interpreting Gramsci as not a Marxist thinker, and instead as offering a democratic theory of popular mobilization that does not involve a class-based force as a crucial population basis or leadership core. Now, to be clear, I fully agree with John in underscoring the profound importance of passages in Gramsci where he emphasizes the need for any hegemonic project to be internally democratic if it is to achieve power for subaltern groups, and where Gramsci envisions processes for fulfilling this egalitarian aspiration. I think of, for example, the key lines that John cites from the study of philosophy on the dialectic between leaders and masses, or Gramsci's writings about organic intellectuals. But I do read Gramsci as saying that a popular group shaped by and in response to historically specific political economic conditions has to supply a basis for the bloc, even though building the social bloc can only mean constructing a heterogeneous formation of solidarities and responding to forms of domination that are entwined with subordination under capital and define working people's lived experiences in all sorts of different ways. I'm not convinced by your claim that to think in this way is to, quote, naturalize the transformative capacities or leadership abilities of some particular socioeconomic group, for instance, the industrial proletariat. There is an alternative here, which involves analyzing the patterns of domination and subject formation for groups rendered socially subordinate by historically and geographically specific configurations of capitalist power. Although I mean specific to eras and regions rather than just to more limited moments in time or local places. We could think, as Ulash Ince suggests, in terms of archipelagic configurations of capitalism, characterized by certain mutually invigorating processes of economic production and human and ecological reproduction, as well as modes of capitalist racialization and gender and sexual power. And thus, we're never naturalizing some working class group like factory workers, just as you rightly admonish theorists against naturalizing the revolutionary capacities of some group defined by body organs or skin tone. Rather, we're being rigorously, historically, and spatially attuned to the emergence of new economically subordinated group formations, which could provide the material foundation and ground the anti-capitalist thrust, not just material and cultural formation, and ground the anti-capitalist thrust that I would say popular mobilization needs to have from a Gramscian perspective as I read him. I'll end with an illustration of what I mean. So I've been doing research in the largely Latino Inland Empire region of Southern California, where the warehouse industry led by Amazon has massively expanded in recent years. And the consequences for area Latinos have been a job market ever more narrowly limited to stultifying and dangerous warehouse labor, the destruction of homes and neighborhoods to make way for ever more warehouse construction, an assault on a distinctive regional ranchero Mexican-American cultural milieu, and a public health and environmental crisis driven by rising levels of air pollution that rival those of Beijing. Right now, you've got groups organizing against the warehouses, either in the form of resurgent unionism focused on workplace issues or a racially inflected environmental justice campaign aimed at defending Latino community spaces and culture. And of course, there's anti-ICE activism. Your analysis would imply, I think, that the EJ or immigrant rights contingents are just as capable as the labor organizers, in principle, of forming the nucleus of a broader counter-hegemonic social bloc in the region. And I'm not saying we have to throw our lot in with the labor organizers, right? I think what really needs to happen from a Gramscian perspective is first the development of a broad and complex form of class consciousness among Latino community members and workers as the basis for a more ambitious kind of political consciousness that's even more widely shared. And what class means here would be defined by a range of situated experiences through which this group's productive activities and reproductive lives are ruled and damaged by warehouse neo-imperialism in ways shot through with racializing dynamics and tied to destructive ecological metabolisms. Precisely through becoming more conscious of these experiences' interconnections, then, this core group could then discern more easily the concrete grounds on which solidarities with other groups or group segments could be formed in building a new social bloc. For instance, middle-class white people affected by the poisonous air, or black co-workers subjected to hazardous conditions in the warehouses. So I wonder what you make of this example, John, and whether you think I'm reading you and the wily Sardinian correctly in this regard. But again, many, many thanks and huge appreciation for giving us this terrific book.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Paul. And Laurence.
Okay, we're trying to speak to this mic.
Yes, you might have to just
Great. Okay,
lean towards it.
so I wanted to talk briefly about three things. So one huge achievement, I saw version 1 of this about 3 years back, at which point it was over 200,000 words. So a sort of 650-page book. And it is a huge achievement, as many of you know, to be able to actually synthesize something which is irreducibly full of specifics. John writes at a certain point, historical life is translated into language while remaining as faithful as possible to historical life. And right now we don't see an awful lot of that. If you pick up the pages of Jacobin, for example, but one could name many things in many political and academic spaces, what you find is intense simplification and picking out one thing, the kind of super simple message. So like John, I've spent my adult life and a bit before as an activist, working with activists in many different countries, many different movements, helping them also to write, in some cases doing my own research. And everybody is in their own situation. It is only from the kind of viewpoint of selling a story as an academic, as a lefty publisher on social media, that you have the choice of saying, this is the thing that matters, and this is how I want to talk about it. People in struggle have choices, but they're not configured like that. So it's a huge achievement of this book to have the different phases that John mentions. They are very, very recognizable. But to allow each of them to have its own particular shape, its own qualities, its relationships, while remaining moments in a process which inevitably is longer and broader than most of our lives and most of our experiences, because it is what hundreds and thousands, millions or tens of millions of people live through. If we think of something like the Chinese Revolution, for example, you can't simplify it beyond a certain point. So it's a huge achievement. It's a great read, and I should say I think it's largely, maybe entirely right in its approach. That's my first thing. But I think
Nobody has a spare pen, do they? Because I need to write
yes,
down what
there
he's
you
saying, and I got so excited my pen has stopped working. Thanks very much. Sorry.
All right, so there's an unresolved, maybe unresolvable question, which is how do we know? And this is a bit the challenge of the form of the academic monograph and the epistemology. Gramsci, thanks to Mussolini, managed to dodge this problem. Many of the best Marxists never really sat down to write at monograph length, and when Marx was eventually forced to do so, he managed book 1. But look, in a monograph, it's quite hard to shake the sort of theological element of saying reality is like this because this is the best way of reading Gramsci. Or Gramsci doesn't quite do that. Gramsci is more likely to say, Ilyich, in other words, Lenin says this, and we can see an example of this, a more sort of literary approach. But, also not convincing beyond a certain point. On this scale and complexity, we simply cannot have an in-depth empirical analysis of a single moment to cover all of this variety, nor can we have a systematic analysis of everything, because everything is so huge. If we just look at the domination that most people most of the time live within, what we call normality, a single account of that is going to fall short. We can't have a purely logical argument, notably when so much of the emphasis for Marxists has to be on what is possible, not what is real, and we have to talk an awful lot about failures and disappointments. The book, entirely reasonably, I think, disclaims grounding in our activism, and in 2025 and in London, or indeed in Berkeley, where the book is published, you can't really say that the same strength of movement experience exists that Gramsci was able to draw from. Now, I'm not trying to resolve these questions. They exist in my own work, but I think it's important to think about them if we want the book to mean something other than a literary intervention in which we juggle ideas and phrases. Because towards the end, the book poses a crucial and practical challenge, given its convincing analysis, which is what the hell should we do? And this problem, for many of us, of course, is increasingly existential in different ways. What do we do? Like Gramsci, in different ways, they are coming for us. So we don't get to, or it is a privilege to be able to duck that question or choose the terms on which you engage with it. So how can we identify what is appropriate to the situation that our own communities and movements are in? Because other communities and movements may be in a different situation. How can we identify the coexistence of those different phases, not just in one place, but internationally, in what a South African scholar called the combined and uneven development of popular struggles, which is always the case. There is never a homogeneity. And most importantly, how can we build relationships between those in practice, which is the core of the living Gramscian tradition? How can we create political relationships that support a shared potential for human development and social transformation, and relate them to groups who are not yet conscious of mobilizing, even if they are in different ways resisting, and not only in one place? So I'm not asking you to answer those questions, but I think it is a merit of a book like this to throw up those questions and to invite us to think more seriously, I want to say, than so much writing and commentary on struggle at the present time. So thank you, John.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Paul and to Laurence. And I'm going to jump in now into the fray. Thank you, John, for writing this book and for giving us an opportunity to think collectively. Can I say it's also a very beautifully written book? So many wonderful turn of phrases which I just wanted to capture. And I said, please, can I use this? And can I quote this? And so on. And it's always lovely when academic writing also is a pleasurable piece of writing to read, which of course writing is an art by itself. So I thought it was beautifully written. It's a big book, as Paul and Laurence both have alluded to. And I have in mind here two particular senses of the term big. Of course, it's an ambitious and dazzling book. It draws a wide landscape, and yet it's subtle, nuanced, and detailed. And this balancing act is never quite an easy thing to achieve. And so that's the first sense of the word big. Now to the second. The first time I read this book, it was close to 600 pages long, and although Laurence now has told me it was 650, so I stand corrected. It came to me as a Word document, and it took a great many weeks to read. I can't remember quite how many, but quite a lot of them. The second time I read the book, it was about 400 pages and a few pages here and there. And the third and the final time I read the book, this version with a very handsome jacket, it's just over 300 pages, 319 pages to be precise. And while there are many aspects of the various versions I liked, can I say that I'm very, very pleased that it stands at 319 pages at this point in time. So this big book does quite a few big things, and you've been hearing that, right? You've been hearing about them. Predominantly, it puts forward, as all three speakers have said, a connective theory of popular mobilization. The word theory is important here. It's so important that John gives it a pride of place in the title itself, and I'll come back to it in a bit. By popular mobilization, as John and Laurence and Paul were explaining, John means the many ways in which subordinated groups rearrange their relationship to challenge and overcome social domination. So this is the meaning. And as you might have already guessed, the book is an ode to Antonio Gramsci. And that is everywhere to be seen, so be in no doubt whatsoever. But even while that might be true, to only say that would be too quick and too caricatured a description of what is a very complex book. So what exactly is John doing in the book? Seems to me that in a sense, what he does is to stretch Gramsci temporally and geographically, taking him out of his time, from his preoccupations, and bringing him to ours, and showing us how Gramsci is indispensable to putting together a global, not a Western, a global connective theory to identify, situate, and connect the highly diverse elements of popular mobilization, which, according to John, have been spectacularly unsuccessful. So something else is needed. A connective theory, then, is important because existing theories, whether they are conservative, liberal, rationalist, or critical, are unable to achieve such a connective intervention. They can't connect these diverse mobilizations. But you might ask, even while that might be the case, why is such a connective theory important, though? Why do we need it? Quite simply, the answer is this. Around the globe, we are witnessing popular uprisings, subaltern mobilizations, and democratic contestations. They portend both a challenge to the prevailing neoliberal authoritarian political dispensations, but also herald the promise of political renewal and a different world order. But what are these political mobilizations, though, and how do we understand them? And furthermore, what forms of world-making do they bring into existence? This is the task John sets himself, and one which he discharges by offering us an expansive Gramscian framework to make sense of the political forms, modalities, and world-making activities of these popular mobilizations taking place across from most of the world, from Greece to China, Africa to the Middle East, and throughout Latin America. However, and this is quite important, this is no technical application of theory or of a technical application of a standard Gramscian framework to study political mobilizations outside the Euro-North Atlantic. Rather, the power and significance of the book lies in its ability to forge an expansive and dynamic Gramscian framework through constantly working with and alongside Gramsci. And that is attentive to both the intersectional complexity, political vitality, and empirical detail of these popular mobilizations, but also to how they challenge, alter, rearrange, and update our existing theoretical frameworks by demanding an urgent response to their political presence. And a response is a must. This expansive Gramscian framework is dynamic, open, non-Eurocentric. As John importantly notes, the aim is not to generalize or theorize on the basis of European examples of popular mobilizations, because that's what we do, right? It's the shorthand way of doing things, and very quick. But really to look at the different forms of popular mobilizations occurring across the globe. Consequently, John gives us a theory that's attentive to contemporary politics of resistance movements and popular mobilizations in the global south, which intersect and interact across a range of axes, including feminist, queer, indigenous, and labor movements, but also anti-colonial and anti-imperial ones. However, John doesn't restrict his careful attentiveness to an analysis which is empirical alone, which would, of course, be somewhat easier thing to do, even though I take the point about, the detail, right? And the enormity of the detail that one has to deal with in doing such a thing. But crucially, he shows us how these mobilizations expand our understanding of key Gramscian concepts of hegemony, counter and alternative hegemony, of subaltern politics and revolutionary praxis and politics. In doing so, the book takes seriously the Gramscian edict of taking seriously the philosophy of politics and the politics of philosophy. One of the key things I want from a book, and maybe you want it too, is for it to transport me to a place of different and hard thinking. And one where I can sit with this different thinking and try and work with it, not to kind of have it resolve things for me, but just for me to be able to sit with it and think with some of the ideas and the places that it takes me. May not be the ideas and places that you might have had in mind, John, or any of the authors who do this for me, but I think that is a wonderful merit and a gift of a book if it's able to do that. And John's book does that for me. In particular, it makes me think about 3 or 4 things, and they're not necessarily your questions, John, but they are the questions that make me want to think about some of the things that your book has raised for me after reading it, as 3 times, 3 iterations. So one of the most famous sayings, often attributed to Antonio Gramsci, is that he championed what he called the optimism of the will and the pessimism of the intellect. I know that this particular aphorism has been interpreted in so many different ways, but what I couldn't help thinking was how much the book is so filled with optimism for theory and the work of theory in the world and what it could make possible. And for John, theory is historically embedded, located, interpretive, and involves historical translation. It is neither an exercise in abstract, disinterested scholasticism, and nor is it rationalist or idealist, but importantly, it is one that is engaged in opposing domination and defending liberation. That is the task of theory. And if theory is all of this and more, and certainly the theory that John sketches is certainly all of this, then what makes me think, and this is something I've been trying to think about, is what is the relationship, or what is the relation of his theory in this book of popular mobilization to other historically embedded theories also engaged in historical translation and perhaps even led by organic intellectuals, right? So what do we have here? Do we have here a book which is a theory of theory? By which I mean is that while it's clear that for John it's clear that this is not a practical handbook. He says that this is not a practical handbook. But is it then a theoretical manual for how other historically located theories of political mobilization could be? If so, could it risk then becoming a normative edict for those other theories coming up in other locations, also doing that work of historical translation, also historically embedded, led by organic intellectuals and all of that? And so if not, then what are the mechanisms that might stop it from becoming one? i.e. becoming prescriptive, hegemonically normative, so that its transnational and dynamic content somehow gets lost and it becomes vanguardist in its own right, the kind of thing that it's trying to kind of sort of critique, right? So is it a theory of theory? The second thing that struck me, and I've been thinking about, but then again, it's my own preoccupation, again, fueled by some of, reading your work, is the question of epistemic justice in all of this, theory building and epistemic justice. Theory building, John describes, necessarily involves an attentiveness to questions of epistemic justice, to questions of epistemic authority. What kinds of theories, which theories are we going to pay attention to, right? And lots of things are in this way, of course. Lots of things come in the way of epistemic justice and epistemic authority, political economies of knowledge production, transnational political economies of knowledge production, the imperial formations and various other forms of epistemic and material violence, right? But these and so on. But these questions which I'm raising here are never, of course, never singular. They always occur in a stream of other questions. So what kinds of intellectual resources then would be required for building new theories, historically translatable, embedded, and so on, theories? What kind of intellectual resources are required for that kind of work? Following Gramsci, there's a very important place in the book on the role of organic intellectuals. And I've been wondering what sorts of institutional and intellectual resources and space and curricula would be required for nurturing organic intellectuals in a neoliberal university. How might one think of the question of intellectual responsibility in this time that we face, including of ours, all of us in this room today? And I have a little bit of a crib here with you on this, okay? So, which is that I've always actually, and this is our different reading, isn't it? I've always read Gayatri Spivak as providing some ways of thinking on the question of intellectual responsibility and epistemic violence, although she comes in for particular critique in your book. And I feel like I need to stand up a little bit for her, because she didn't really think of the subaltern as the voiceless, rather it turned the critique around to the imperial mindset and said, because of the epistemic violence and erasure of epistemic authority of others, you simply would not hear the subaltern, because it is not that they can't speak, but that you can't hear them, right? So it's the hegemonic ear which can't hear. But of course we can disagree. But I just thought that seemed to me, and that linked in with questions of pluribausality, with questions of, anti-colonial, anti-imperial thinking and epistemic authority and building theoretical sort of worldviews. Finally, and this is the final thing, one of the really exciting turns of the book for me is that when John offers a little, and he didn't do that, he did towards right at the end, if you were paying attention, offers a little tantalizing theoretical glimpse of what contemporary popular mobilization would look like, right? So remember, he's taking Gramsci from his time to our time, right? And so what would be the contemporary form of political mobilization, right? What would it look like following this sort of theoretical thinking through of that? And according to John, it would take the form of a post-subaltern historical bloc infused with a transnational popular consciousness. So the transnational popular, as in, Gramsci talked about the national popular, and he talks about the transnational popular. The trans in transnational popular does really important work, because it carries the move beyond essentialized binary thinking, and also beyond the essentialized or enclosures of the flag, the anthem, the central bank. And I love this bit because this is actually quoting directly from John, and he says, all of which belong to the museum. So yeah, I love that. But then, how can such a transnational popular consciousness be forged? Again, we're coming back to the question of intellectual resources. We're coming back to the question of spaces within which this, and of intellectual responsibility. And again, I want to know a little bit more about mechanisms, the institutions, the spaces where it will be fashioned and wrought and contested and brought together. I'm excited for it. I'm waiting for it. But I want to know more. So please do say a little about it if you get a chance. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm back into my role as chair, and we are going to, I think we should just go straight to Q&A, and if you get a chance to fold some of the questions in your answers, because you might find that there might be some echoes, then do that, and otherwise you might have some time. So we have about, I know that we have the room till about 7:30.
Well, we do. We officially end at 7, but we have the room a little bit longer.
Yeah. So we could, if we could just borrow 10 minutes from 7. So if we could somehow finish at 10 past, that would be nice. That would give us a very good, solid 30 minutes plus for Q&A, which I think is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm looking at you, all of you, for questions, and I'm going to collect a few. And I'm going to collect a few questions, and in particular, I want to make students, master's students, postgraduate students, undergraduate students, very welcome in this room. So in particular, if you have any questions for John, please do feel very welcome and enabled to do so, and raise your hands if you do. But I will collect a few questions at the start. So I'm looking for hands. And you can do anything. You can show me, you can wave at me, you can nod at me, you can raise your hand. Yeah, I see two already here. And is there anybody here? And I see one. Shall I take one more? I mean, I'm happy to stay at 3 if you're happy. Yeah? No? Okay, come back for the next round then. Okay, so let me take 3 questions. So I'll take a question from Aicha, right at the back. Then I'll go to Shaku next, and then I'll come to you in the second row. Is that okay? So before you, just as you ask your question, if you could just very quickly say who you are. Please remember, it's not an existential exercise. It's simply name. And just, if you want to say where you are affiliated, that would be good. Okay, yes, please, Aisha.
Who am I and what do I wish to become? I'm Aisha Chubukchu from the Department of Sociology. First of all, very many congratulations, warmest congratulations, and thanks also to the respondents for raising fantastic questions for John. My question, since John, we've known each other for so many years, and Gramsci and you come together in my mind, and everybody who knows you knows about Gramsci and your adoration for Gramsci. My question was about the experience of reading Gramsci and writing about Gramsci critically. So was there a point in your writing that you felt he didn't get this one right? And how did you deal with that? Because a number of issues were mentioned, the national popular versus transnational popular. I would be interested in where Gramsci got it wrong, according to you, if you would like to comment on it. But more so, the experience of an intellectual in dealing with idealization, perhaps, and disagreement within the context of that idealization. I'm very interested in that. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Shakul Banerjee in the Department of Media and Communications, another long-time knower of your admiration for Gramsci. I've also participated in assisting you in this on various occasions. I've got a two-pronged question. The first part is about what we might consider Gramsci's never naming a certain concept, and that was counter-hegemony.
Yeah.
At no point in the notebooks anywhere or other writers does he name counter-hegemony, and yet it is one of the most used ideas, concepts by revolutionaries, by activists around the world, and beloved of scholars, to the extent that many of our students don't know that Gramsci didn't name counter-hegemony and often attribute it to him. So why do you think, from your reading of him, and I've also studied almost in exegesis way his work, why do you think he didn't name it? And the second part of that is linked to the first question, counter-hegemony. So now, believe it or not, hegemony, consent, these are beloved of the far right in India.
Yeah.
And I want to think of a concept of illusory hegemonies.
Yeah.
It's the backlash, right, against rights discourses that we see all around the world. And that backlash can only exist in the context of the construction of an illusory hegemony. And I wonder whether these people, these folk who also say they're doing counter-hegemonic struggle, are not onto something, precisely because he didn't name what counter-hegemony is.
Thank you, Shaku. Yes, please, in the second row. Yes. Yes.
Hello, I am Bruno, and I am doing the Masters in Political Theory here at LSE. I had 2 questions. The first one, I would say, I can hold it actually. The first one, I would say, more theoretical, was about the claim that one of the speakers said they found in your book about whether Gramsci is really a Marxist or whether we should understand him as more generally as a theorist of democratic popular mobilization. So I would like to hear more about that. I think that more hardcore Marxists would maybe find that claim a bit controversial, so it would be interesting to discuss it. And the second thing was about your views on the pink tide in Latin America, the governments of Chavez or maybe the Kirchner movement in Argentina. As I understand, there has some so-called Gramscian theorists like Laclau. They would say that in some sense these pink tide governments were trying to build a new hegemony in Latin America, progressive hegemony. Yet there have been some claims about those governments turning corrupt or turning authoritarian. So I was wondering whether, how does your analysis of popular mobilization judge those movements, and whether the sort of Gramscian categories that you are deploying in your book can help us better understand what happened in those cases.
Thank you. Thank you so much. John, so you've got 3 questions if you want to take them.
Yes, no, lovely. And so thank you so much. That's great. And thank you so much for the wonderful engagement. I mean, you're very generous, and also it's very nice to have some critical engagement as well. But I may be able to respond also to your question. So Aicha's question. Yeah, that experience of reading, writing critically, and when I think, oh, we didn't get that right, and goodness me, could that suddenly could throw you into a panic, couldn't it? And so that's a great question. But except that, the general picture for me was to sort of find it, illuminating and exciting. And so the general picture was one of feeling educated. So it wasn't that so much, but I do, what I did find, and I suppose what I did find is that there's a lot of things in Gramsci that are very, very difficult to understand, and really many things. I mean, you think, goodness, people have sort of glib summaries of what he's doing, and then you actually read the thing, and it's like, what's going on here? And that's part of the provocation, part of the interest. The danger of that is the ambiguity, the contradiction, the use of Gramsci as a sort of quotation for all seasons, right? That's the danger of it, the eclecticism, the sort of way it can be, taken home to mother, as somebody once said, although I don't really like that expression at all, but someone once said it to me. But, I found these, there's like the one concrete example, Gramsci has this fabulous concept of the war of position, where you have to engage in an organized and cultural struggle in the sort of fortresses of civil society in order to, open up spaces for contestation, in my theory, really to sort of incorporate the well springs of autonomy and to engage people who are fleeing from the torturous contradictions of domination. And this war of position, which, we're fighting here, right? That's what often alienated academics are doing. They're fighting a war of position in an institution which is generally stacked against you, and that's true in the media and elsewhere. But Gramsci so most people interpret war of position to mean what you do in preparation for the final assault, right? And that's great, and that happens. But Gramsci also says war of position comes after the final assault. And you're thinking, Christ, can that possibly be true? And actually, the reading process for me was what you sort of dismiss it. You think, oh my God, it just can't be like that. I mean, please, I thought I'd got it straight, and now he's saying that. But then you have to stick with it. And the mad thing about Gramsci is if you stick with it, I believe, and I guess this isn't toning me down, you find something new. And you find something really interesting about the importance of the war of position. And just in the specific example here, he's sort of thinking about the ways in which you isolate a ruler when the ruler has sort of concentrated all the forces of coercion at their disposal. And then and I think of the general strike in Iran in late 1978, when the ruler had concentrated all their forces and they're about to massacre the millions on the streets. But then there's a general strike, and it actually paralyzes the ruler because it gets rid of the oil revenue, it knocks out the banks, it knocks out the airlines. The ruler can't act. And the strike, as Gramsci, well, you know, it depends. But sometimes it's war of position, sometimes it's war of maneuver. So I actually found, you know, that it's exciting to read the difficult parts and just keep going with them. That's my general attitude. But as you say, the national popular and the transnational popular, there is this idea that the national popular, after, you know, was such a crucial figure in social emancipation for so long, but that it has, in the last sort of 50 years approximately, has become ossified and problematic and often turned to conservative and even, you know, the right-wing agendas that Shaku's talking about. So that's, you know, that's the updating and living nature of the theory, and how that happens. How does the updating process happen? And that goes to the question of who am I to speak? You know, the sort of intellectual in the university who may be alienated, but surely not an organic intellectual, and quite right, definitely not an organic intellectual. So but the updating process, the live process in the Gramscian scheme, because he's very insistent that it's a live theory. The learning and updating comes from the struggles of subaltern social groups. Remember, they're being subalternized in new ways all the time, like your Amazon workers. And so their attempts to sort of overcome the alienation, the exploitation, the domination, that, you know, and the coalitions that they're building, environmental justice, anti-ICE, these are what we learn from. That's how you can update the theory. So the theory is updated in that way. And that's how you sort of learn through struggle, what Laurence Coax speaks about a lot in his writing, which is the kind of learning from each other's struggles. And I think, and so this goes to that question about that somebody asked, was that you, about contemporary examples of what the transnational popular might look like. Well, we learn, don't we? We learn from Chiapas and the Zapatistas from the 1990s to the present. We learn from the Rojava Revolution and its forms of democratic autonomy. We learn from the Palestinian BDS movement about what the transnational popular consciousness is, which is a work in progress. And it's absolutely not for the arbitrary actions of, say, one intellectual operating in a neoliberal university to determine the priorities or which theory, just out of a potpourri of theories, is the one. It's much more a case of showing, of aiming to use the sorts of methods that organic intellectuals have used in order to learn and develop a theory. So that's one thing there. Counter-hegemony, yeah, it's a great question. Why didn't Gramsci name it? Do you know, maybe there is an answer to that, which has to do with he is extremely concerned to deal with negative formulations of resistance and to criticize them, right? All the way through. He even says Marxism is passive. Materialism is passive, because when the subaltern moves to a stage of autonomy, when the subaltern is directive or in charge or organizing, the subaltern is, the whole mode of existence has changed, he says. And you cannot see your existence as being purely determined, for instance, by wage labor exploitation, the accumulation of capital. You have to have a theory that has a positive content, a positive appeal, that can organize in civil society, build a culture, think about the state, and therefore build a hegemony that's actually capable of organizing people and bringing them along with it. So he's so counter-hegemony for Gramsci is too negative. It's too passive. So he always speaks about nucleus of hegemony, embryo of hegemony, alternative hegemony, and the whole idea of building a new kind of social bloc and historical bloc. So that's probably why he doesn't say counter-hegemony. But I do use the word once or twice in the book to refer to those first two phases in the long journey from subordination to revolution. So when you're wrestling with the torturous contradictions of domination, counter-hegemony can make some sense. when you're surging into the streets in a popular uprising or building a factory council or trying to create an alternative to the neoliberal university, you are engaged in a form of what I call the wellsprings of autonomy. And in that context, yeah, counter-hegemony can make some sense. But then when the subaltern becomes directive, when you start trying to win consent, defeat enemies, organize, develop a broader ideology, then at that moment, it's not counter-hegemony anymore. It's competing as a force against other potential hegemonies. And so that's sort of my speculations on that. But the right, my main criticism of right-wing Gramscianism is, contained in the word culture war. Right-wing Gramscians, they take this idea of Gramsci as a cultural theorist above all. They do an idealist interpretation of Gramsci. And then they say, so we're going to just change the narrative. We're going to have a culture war. We're going to get on social media. We're going to use huge sums of money provided by capitalists and financial capitalism and leaders who are very keen to suppress any form of popular democracy. And we're going to pump out a narrative that blames all the subaltern social groups for the whole crisis of neoliberal capitalism. And so that's why, that's right-wing Gramscianism. And they just take the culture war. But as Laurence Coax so sort of expertly pointed out, that the Gramscian process of popular mobilization involves, organic connections to subaltern social groups who engaging in real mass mobilization, whether it's in trade unions, whether it's in, the BDS movement or the popular committees or factory councils or, this is a kind of an infrastructure, an organized infrastructure of resistance that is part and parcel of distinguishing between progressive struggles to unify theory and practice and overcome domination as compared to the sort of snake oil of right-wing populism, which promises a culture war. But what I say in the book is that right-wing populism also depends on genus thinking. So it does this thing, which is a phrase, again, from the thesis on Feuerbach. It's when Marx says, what is genus? It's when you think of a group as naturally united by some internal dumb generality. So you think of Arabs, Muslims, gays, queers, the real white American, the real Muslim, the real working class, or whoever it is. Not working class, because I think it's different. But genus thinking is when the group is united by some dumb internal generality that's actually a figment of the imagination of those ruling classes who are trying to use, manipulate, and control that subaltern social group. So it's that sort of genus thinking that infects right-wing populism, which is completely alien to the Gramscian cultural critique of fascism. Because one of the things about Gramsci is there has to be a cultural critique of fascism. We can't just say, fascists are capitalists in disguise. There has to be a reason why, culturally speaking, they can't generate what culture can generate, which is this sort of passage between feeling and knowing, which is a real grappling with the predicaments and puzzles and that humans and subordinated and other groups experience in their lives. These sort of cardboard cutouts that are peddled by right-wing populism, the immigrants are going to come and, rape your daughters. That isn't a culture. It's a culture war, but it doesn't bring a rich and convivial culture to anybody. So that's a critique, a reason to think, well, right-wing populism, it can mobilize, but it portends civil war at home and, interstate war abroad. And that's sometimes where it ends up and where it ends up collapsing. So it can eat its own tail, but it can do a lot of damage along the way, and there's no reason to be naive about that. So Paul and Bruno asked this question about Marxism. So is Gramsci a Marxist? Remember my long list of people, Mario Tronti from the 60s, Althusser from France, Trotskyites in the 20s. They all said Gramsci's not a Marxist. They said he's a deviationist, he's a petty bourgeois, So, but other people have embraced Gramsci as a Marxist. So actually it's a very unstable question. And neither Marxists nor Gramscians can decide whether Gramsci was a Marxist or not. And of course it always reminds me of Raymond Williams' wonderful essay from the 70s where he says, you're a Marxist, aren't you? It's the sort of card-carrying thing. You know, you're supposed to be a Marxist, and if you're not a Marxist, there's a real problem. And so, you know, there has to be a way outside of that, because otherwise you end up with what Laurence Coax mentioned, this kind of shallow intellectual polemics that are not interesting to anybody outside a narrow circle of people who engage in a kind of ideological labeling process. And that's fatal. But Gramsci's very strong on that. You know, he's very against all of that. You know, he doesn't believe the philosophy of an age can be summed up by one intellectual, and he certainly doesn't do it himself. So, for all his strengths and powers. So that question is, you know, part of the politics of labeling, and I can see my student Iman there, and who's written a wonderful PhD and now book, right, on the common sense of the Salafi movement and the Gramscian framework in Britain, and it's this politics of labeling which you get in Salafism, you get it in Marxism, and you get it, you know, on the left, and so definitely something to avoid. But there's a big but, which is that I do think it's helpful to situate the living Gramscian tradition in a kind of constellation of its own. I cleave to the originality of that tradition, and that's simply because, well, first, I don't see the textual evidence that Gramsci prioritized the material over the ideal, and then there's a huge amount of textual evidence that shows that he didn't. So, and you pretty much have to prioritize the material over the ideal if you're really going to be a Marxist. But this goes to Paul's very nice, nuanced, sensitive question about, so wait a minute, why can't the workers in the Amazon factories form the core nucleus of a social bloc going forward in this particular region of America? And the thing is, why not? Why not? I mean, they could, right? And you know, Gramsci's quite good about, again, it's always Gramsci, sorry, but about how some elements within the subaltern social groups at certain times and places might be leading. And it may be that that is the place to build the articulation of struggles. It could be. But what's different is that it's not there's no social group or class that's naturally entitled to be the hegemon. And the process of building the social bloc and the historical bloc, you know, unless it's to be riven by monism and reductionism and competition between groups and classes, has to kind of embrace this articulation of struggles and not see itself as for all time the nucleus. You know, that sort of trans-historical. But in certain times and places, sometimes it could be the feminists of, you know, the Scunthorpe feminists in the 1970s that I write about in the book, or the Steve Biko's Black Consciousness movement in South Africa. Sometimes that's the nucleus, and other social groups have to get with the program. Like in South Africa, the labour movement was more problematic when it came to organising workers, but Steve Biko's Black Consciousness movement could have also been the nucleus of what can then build into a wider social bloc. So that's my sort of, response to that. But I should stop because I keep talking.
Okay.
And I'll,
all right. So thank you for that. I'm going to.
Sorry, I'll be quicker next time.
Yes, I'm going to keep you on a very tight leash next time. Okay, so we've got 7 minutes because I said we would take it to 7:10. So I'm going to collect questions, very brief questions, if that's okay. So I'm looking this side now. So if you want, this is your chance. Otherwise, that's it. So I see two questions, and I'm looking here. And I see 2 here, and I'm going to take just 4, right? So very briefly, please, Lucas. And then, sorry, yes. And then after that, I saw, yes. And then, yes, that's it. Thank you. Yes, please.
Great, thank you so much. Is this working? Yes. First, thank you so much, John. I'm really excited to read the book. And actually, when I was looking for the ticket for today's event, I was searching my email inbox, I was searching Chalcraft, and I discovered the first interaction we ever had, which was when I was an undergraduate here at the LSE, and you gave a very good lecture on actually some of these themes, and I was asking you for more things to read. So, thank you so much for also inspiring people like me to pursue these kinds of things moving forward. My question, I'll try to be very brief. How should we make sense of forms of popular mobilization that on the face of it seem like they are subaltern resistant to forms of domination, but that might so, sidestepping the question of kind of fascist or far-right mobilization, where in their own terms they would say that's what they're doing, but we would say that that isn't what they're doing. But what about the situation where that does actually seem to be fitting your definition? So I'm thinking about the color revolutions in the Cold War, or we could think about the umbrella movement in Hong Kong, or we could think about these kinds of movements that are popular mobilizations that are trying to resist against some form of domination, but that actually they might, in the grand scheme of things, be reinforcing certain types of hegemony. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yes, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Emilio Zucchetti and I'm a Roman historian, so very different room from the ones that I usually frequent. So I am myself a stumbling student of resistance and bottom-up politics, and I have tried to apply and use Gramscian ideas to my material. And this discussion was very interesting. I'm looking forward to read the book, but at the end of the discussion I leave with a crucial question about what is the popular. Where do we sit with the people, the popular? Because some of what you said is very Laclauian, some is not. And in the end, once you remove the fundamental element of class as a necessity, where do you end with the formation of the historical bloc of the people, of the popular? Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, please, there were two questions. So. Yes, I'll come first to you and then I'll come to you in front. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Bailey. I'm a political theory. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm a political theory master student here. My question is sort of about the departure from the popular will, as it were, to the national popular will, rather, to the transnational, but at the same time maintaining or emphasizing the heterogeneity of different social groups. My question is, how do you hold these seemingly conflicting notions of a transnational, which in some way has to have a universal or international quality to it, movement, with recognizing and in some way upholding the heterogeneity or the different social circumstances without overly homogenizing them or falling into some sort of like centralized form of elite control, of a movement which would sort of contravene the qualities that would be expected of the organic intellectuals?
Thank you. Yes, please. Yes, right.
Thank you so much. My name is Jad. I'm an old student of John. It's great to see you again, John. And congratulations on the book. So my question is about the state. I know you briefly mentioned it in the presentation, but it didn't feature much in the discussion. And I'm very interested in how you conceptualized what the state represented in trying to bring together all these movements into this wider theory, when we have vastly different state forms, not only from the time Gramsci was writing, but also around the world today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. John, you have 1 minute and 40 seconds.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Okay. So I need to see, so for Lucas's lovely question, thank you, the colour revolutions, the umbrella movement. Yeah, I need to see more Gramscian work on those. I mean, I have supervised some master's dissertations on the umbrella movement. I don't have a Gramscian analysis to hand. I wonder about the subaltern content, though, and whether it was more a case of sort of alienated intellectuals and students and others, and whether it was more about alienation than oppression, as it were. I wonder. That's like a hypothesis, but one would have to study it properly. But you have these movements that do engage certain sectors of middle classes. There is this thing in the book, the radicalization of middle classes is very important. It's not to be scoffed at or said that it's somehow something that we shouldn't, that's inauthentic or something. It's very important. But But the question is, there needs to be a subaltern and autonomous constituencies that can articulate with them to give them the drive and the passion and the, purely middle class. It's what happens to so many human rights movements. They become professionalized, middle class, procedural, juridical, legalistic, and in the end, nothing happens. So there's that. As for the Roman historian, the popular, thank you. Yes, Leclerc or not? Well, there's quite a lot of discussion with Leclerc, but I do read Leclerc as this isn't about populism. It's about popular mobilization. I try to make a distinction. And it's also, so the popular is defined as the plural ensemble of the subordinate, which is how Gramsci defines it. So that's the idea. It's not a narrative. It's not a process of politico-ideological articulation, which is what Leclerc calls it. It's not. It's living human predicaments and puzzles and painful things that happen. So, that's the plural ensemble of the subordinate. That's the popular. It's not a juridical concept. So that's not so much Leclerc. But Leclerc has been criticized rightly for removing class. So this book doesn't aim to remove class, but it says class consciousness is above all important in the phase of autonomy, as with group consciousness. These are vitally important. But then the question becomes, how do you build a social bloc in the phase of consent? And then after that, how do you build a historical bloc, which is even bigger and more expansive? So you don't remove class, absolutely not. You feed it into a historical bloc, but you depart from, the early Leclerc move in the 70s, they said, you can have the working class can be at the centre of a democratic historical bloc, and they were very excited about that. But the problem is the working class does not have the right to be at the centre of the historical bloc, transhistorically. It depends. So that's my answer to that, but, good question. And the national to the transnational, while emphasising heterogeneity, one of the examples I give is that Gramsci, when he was young, was an ardent Sardinian nationalist, right? He wanted to throw the continentals into the sea. And he went from the south, he went to Turin, and he became this idea that the south and the north could combine under the sign of the national popular. And so it was a more expansive, and he left behind his Sardinian nationalism, but what did he do? He wanted his son to learn Sardinian dialect from prison. So he did not reject the Sard culture. He did not reject the Sard drive for autonomy. It just became a phase in the drive for autonomy that later became less interesting to him as he tried to build a broader social and historical bloc. So that's an example of how you can incorporate heterogeneity into a project which is more, in Italy, you could speak of transnational in a sense in the 19th and 20th century because the country was so divided. But that's the figure of North and South. But that figure now expanded onto a broader geographic terrain implies the transnational, because North and South in the present have this heterogeneity, but how do you overcome the challenges without creating some form of transnational popular? And you learn also from things like Rojava and others, and you don't pretend, like me, that you're an organic intellectual, because you're not. You learn from other organic intellectuals and popular educators. So on the state, well, it's a bit too short, isn't it, Jad? But thank you for the question. But 30 seconds on the state. Well, the state in Gramsci is political society. It's binding association. And it's distinct from civil society as voluntary association, but the integral state has both of those things together. But the one thing I see Gramsci, that the state is to be radically transformed, but it can't be done away with, because binding association will continue even in a progressive form of hegemony. Sorry, that's very, very brief. But but I do want to come back to your things, but I think I can do that later, can't I, in the George?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We will do that. We will do that because there is time for that as well. So can I just say...
Sorry. You see, subaltern, Spivak, just one word. The famous article, the subaltern cannot speak, right? Striking the subaltern dumb. So I didn't like that very much. But there's so much else in that article which does not disown the project of representation with a flourish, as you say, and that's really interesting. But she wrote that article when she was a Europeanist. She didn't know anything about South Asian history except what she'd said to her sister. And she confessed all that in 2011. And then she said, okay, I don't say the subaltern cannot speak anymore. She doesn't say that anymore. She says the subaltern cannot be heard, which is different. And that's what you said was positive in Spivak, and I agree with you.
Excellent.
So just
I'm so glad we're agreed. I was a bit worried we won't be. But I think this is a wonderful note of agreement, but also, I think, general energizing note to end on. So can I just say it's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much to John for writing the book. Thank you very much to Laurence, to Paul, and to all of you for asking your wonderful questions, for such an amazing engagement. And thank you to John for answering the questions, and with so much engagement and joy, and it was really great to see that. So thank you very much, and as I said, and I promised you, that you are very welcome to join us for a drink at George IV pub, where we can carry on Spivak and various other things. So thank you very much.